Hi, I'm Jay, and this is a Trion / Herrmidifier brand bypass style humidifier. Now, yours might look a little different, but that part's unimportant. Today what we're going to talk about is water leakage. So there are a number of different issues that can come up. One, which would be the most common I suppose, would be water leaking down here. So if you happen to have water leaking where the water line is attached to the solenoid valve right at that connection, usually you can solve that by just getting a couple of wrenches out and tightening up that fitting just a bit. Usually it's a brass fitting, and normally, you can give it a quarter of a turn or something like that, an eighth of a turn, and that'll fix that problem. If you tighten it up and it's pretty darn tight, but it's still leaking, then what you're going to have to do is take that connection apart, cut the 1/4 inch copper tubing that you likely have, and then get a new brass nut and then a new brass ferrule and put it all back together. Because typically when you have that kind of a situation, something is wrong with that connection. Either the brass nut is cracked or the ferrule is flawed. This particular one happens to have a plastic hose, and you might have that and still have a brass nut. Again, usually solving that problem involves just tightening it up. Okay, so this particular one has this funny connection here that is a pressure connection. So it kind of grabs it, and what you do to take it apart is just kind of push up on this little black plastic ring here, and you can just pull this thing back out. And installing it is the reverse of that. You just push it up in there until it seats. So it has little grippers in there, and it's self-sealing. It's really a magnificent way of doing things when when it comes to serviceability. So we're going to take the cover off this thing so we can look inside. Now that we have the cover off, we'll talk about some other possibilities. So there's the valve, by the way. Another possibility is you have water leaking here on the outlet side of the valve. Again, usually that's just a matter of tightening up this little fitting right here. Another thing we run into is water sometimes dripping out of the bottom of the unit and out of the cabinet here, or out of here where the unit touches the ductwork. Usually when it's doing something like that, it's either feeding far too much water up here to the top of the pad, or the pad is plugged because it hasn't been replaced for quite a while. These pads need to be replaced a minimum of once a year. If yours is all caked up and looks like a brick, obviously it has not been replaced in the last 12 months and it needs to be replaced. If you have water leaking out of the cabinet itself, let's say coming out here on the seam between the ductwork and the unit, or water pouring into the ductwork, or dripping out anywhere around here, and you look around and you don't really see anything, chances are you have something like too much water feeding from the valve up to the top and flooding this thing. So that flooding of too much water is usually caused by the orifice being worn out or missing, and it goes right here. There is normally a very small nylon orifice that's about the size of an eraser on a pencil. It has an extremely small hole in it, and that is what's used to restrict the amount of water that leaves this valve, okay, and goes up and feeds the pad. So over time, that little orifice in there wears out, and just the water rushing through it over time makes the hole larger and larger and larger, and eventually gets so large that potentially water is just rushing down this thing, and it just can't handle all that water, and it will be leaking out of here, or it'll be just wasting entirely too much water. Normal operation, when this unit is running and working properly, water will be trickling down the drain. If water is flying down the drain, that's a problem. So these orifices here, they need to be replaced every 3 to 5 years. Replacing it on this model, again, fairly simple. You turn the unit off, turn off the water, take the cover off, you press this little ring here, pull the tube out, take the orifice out, put a new one in, put it all back together. On other models, this is a brass nut, and you have to kill the power to everything and turn off the water and get the wrenches out and loosen it up, take the orifice out and replace it. Another thing that can cause too much water or water dripping out of this thing is if the pad is shot. These pads need to be replaced a minimum of once a year. If you have not replaced your pad in a year or less, potentially this pad can get covered in scale. And if this thing gets covered in scale and looks like a brick, then the water can just run all over the place, and it can drip into the ductwork, it can run off the back side of it, and just pour into the humidifier and then drip down here. And if that's the case, just take it apart, clean it up, put a new humidifier filter in it. Thanks for watching. For additional help or questions, feel free to contact us.